Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming here and supporting these ideas. And I'm extremely grateful that you're all here. This is the first evening, and today is the launch of the book, and your support means a lot to me. I also want to thank my co-author, Menas Kafatos, quantum physicist. He's a quantum physicist and cosmologist, an expert on climate change, so very relevant for our times. And he made sure that all the science in this book is correct. I want to thank my family from Crown Publishing, my editor, Gary, Diana, my publisher, Tammy from Crown, and my colleagues from my office who are here, Felicia and Gabrielle, and then a member of the Chopra Foundation here, Jennifer Rock, and Lindsay, who's a neuroscience expert and an expert in transpersonal psychology and doing a lot of research on the transcendent self and how that relates to the brain. Okay, so now we can start, and let me start with a little story. It's a good way to get into the genesis of this book. So a few years ago, I was traveling around the country and speaking on my book then, which was also published by the same Crown family. It's called God, A Story of Revelation. So revelation, as you know, means revealed truth. So what I did in this book is track the history of how humans have thought about their place in the universe since the time of the Old Testament. So that book starts with Job in the Old Testament. Gary, you'll remember that. And then it goes through the insights and revelations of many great mystics, saints, Christian saints, Jewish rabbis, the great Adi Shankara from India, and it ends with a conversation between Einstein and Tagore. The new book begins with a conversation between Einstein and Tagore. So I don't think many of you may be familiar with who Tagore was, but he was a great sage, a great teacher, a poet. He had won the Nobel Prize. So he and Einstein met in 1930 outside Berlin before the war broke out, discussing the nature of reality. So Einstein was what they call a realist. He believed that the physical world existed independent of our experience of it. And Einstein said that that was what science says. And Tagore argued with him on that point, and he said, actually, the only way we know that the universe exists is because we are conscious beings. And the universe is an experience in our consciousness. They didn't quite agree on everything, but they were very respectful of each other. So this book, which you have today, begins with that conversation. It also ends with that conversation, because it's a very important conversation for our time, the nature of reality. Anyway, I was traveling through the country talking about that, and as part of my tour, I was in Los Angeles, where my son lives, Gotham. Some of you may know of his work. He's a filmmaker, and he picked me up from the airport, at the airport, with my then 5-year-old grandson, whose name is Krishan. We call him Krishu, and his mother is Chinese American, so we also refer to him as the Chindian, and he's a very smart, precocious little boy. So as we got out of the airport, he looked at me and he said, Dada, which is the Indian word for grandfather on the father's side. He said, what's dark energy? From a 5-year-old. So I said, what do you know about dark energy? And he rolled his eyes up and he said, it flows through the night sky, which is a beautiful description. I said, what else do you know about it? He said, it's 70% of the universe. So this coming from a 5-year-old was quite astonishing to me. As we stepped out of the airport and we were driving by Santa Monica, I rolled the window down and we could see the ocean. We could smell it. It was a beautiful day in Santa Monica. And he looked at me again and he said, how did they make the ocean? I said, who make the ocean? He said, they. I said, no, Krishu, that's not a way of asking question. You have to tell me what you mean by they. So he thought for a moment, and then he reframed the question. He said, how did the ocean get made? It's a very clever little fellow. So I said, well, the ocean got made the same way as the earth. We split off a big giant star, which is a good way of explaining it to children, and that became the solar system. And I said to him, do you know how many planets there are in the solar system? And he said, well, if you count Pluto, there are 9. But some people don't think Pluto is a planet. In that case, there are 8. So I said, and where did the solar system come from? He said, from the galaxy. I said, where did the galaxy come from? He said, from the universe. And so I said, and where did the universe come from? And without batting an eyelid, he said, from another dimension. And so, I've been thinking about this stuff for 30 years. And this 5-year-old kid, he kind of summarizes it in less than 3 minutes. So, I'm Indian and I'm wondering to myself, who's this kid, Names like Galileo and Copernicus and even Einstein, coming. We believe that everything recycles, including souls. So I'm thinking, who's this kid? I said, Krishu, how do you know all this? And he said, it's on my Pokemon. So I share this story for 2 reasons. One is you don't need to go to university anymore or MIT. The information is on Pokemon. And the second reason I share this with you is because if you look up the open questions in science today, then there are 2 open questions that stand out right away. By the way, before I forget, at the book signing, Menas will be joining me for the book signing as well. So the moment I thought of science, I thought of him. There are 2 questions that are considered part of the open questions of science. There are many, but 2 very important ones are, number 1, what is the universe made of? Everything is supposed to be made of something, right? This microphone is made of, I think, plastic. But in any case, everything is made of something. So what's the universe made of? Well, 70% of the universe, as my little Krishu said, is this mysterious entity called dark energy. And the reason we don't know what it is that it's a construct. It's a human construct to explain the observation that galaxies are moving apart from each other at a very fast speed. Okay, and what's expanding is the space between galaxies. That's the observation. So there's an entity called the cosmological constant, which is now considered to be dark energy, which is doing this. Well, that leaves 30% of the universe, which remains. And of that, 26% is another mysterious entity, and it's called dark matter. And the reason it's called dark matter is that it's invisible. It's not made up of atoms. Like you are made up of atoms, I'm made up of atoms. Everything in this room is made up of atoms. Stars and galaxies are made of, or at least they're the crucible in which atoms get manufactured. But this mysterious substance is not atomic. It does not reflect light, absorb light, emit light. And so we can't see it. So why is it called matter? The reason it's called matter is that it explains, theoretically, all the unexplained gravity or explanation for gravity. So it's literally supposed to be the scaffolding that holds a galaxy together. Regular atomic matter is not enough to explain the total amount of gravity that's supposed to be there in order to hold a galaxy together. And so it's supposed to bend space-time in the same way as regular matter. It's the scaffolding of a galaxy, and now they believe there are 3 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, and trillions and trillions and trillions of planets. And were it not for dark matter, our solar system would not be there. The planets that are going around the solar system would spin off and get lost in interstellar space, so you and I would not exist if it weren't for this so-called dark matter. That leaves 4% of the universe, which is atomic, of which 99.99% is invisible interstellar dust, which is mostly hydrogen and helium, but we can't see it. So the visible universe, the 3 trillion galaxies with the 700 sextillion stars and the trillions and trillions of planets, is 0.01% of what exists out there. And here's the problem, even with that, the universe that we know, the visible universe, which is made up of atoms, then the atoms themselves are made up of subatomic particles, and the particles themselves have a very strange kind of existence. As particles, they occupy units, they occupy locations in space-time as particles, and they have units of mass and energy. But as waves, that is, before they are measured as particles, they have no units of mass and energy. They exist in some invisible space that is frequently called Hilbert space. But if you ask mathematicians and physicists, where is Hilbert space? They say it's a multi-dimensional infinite space. But you say, where is it? What's it made of? They say it's made of possibility waves. You say, where are these possibility waves? And they will usually say, shut up and calculate. Okay, because the mathematics works. And in fact, everything I've told you is a mathematical construct. Okay, to explain the expansion of the universe, to explain the gravity, to explain what we observe. So what is the universe made of? It seems the best answer is it's made of nothing. And then the question arises, what is the nothingness that is this beautiful place we're in, Riverside Church, your body? What is nothing? Because it seems to be the source of everything. It seems to be the source. Menas was telling me yesterday that if you divide infinity by any number, you'll get infinity. But if you divide any number by 0, you'll also get infinity. So 0 and infinity seem to be equivalent. nothing and everything seem to be equivalent. Okay, so the first open question, what's the universe made of? Nothing. The second open question is, what's the biological basis of consciousness? So consciousness is, let's define it. Consciousness is the subjective element of knowing in every experience. You know that you're here. You know that you exist. You know that this, what we call a church, this space exists, this building exists, this microphone exists. This is a subjective experience in your consciousness. So Rupert Spira, who's a great meditation teacher who I admire a lot, he's a non-dual teacher of meditation, he says consciousness is that in which all experience occurs. So right now this experience is occurring in your consciousness. It's also that in which all experience is known. You are having this experience, you also know this experience is happening. And then the third thing he says, and this is part of all the teaching in the non-dual traditions, it's also consciousness is that out of which all experience is made. In other words, this church is made out of consciousness. Your body is made out of consciousness. Your thoughts are modified forms of consciousness. Your emotions are modified forms of consciousness. So are your sense perceptions. How do you know anything exists? Because of sensory experience, sound, touch, sight, taste, smell. Okay, that's how you know things exist. So what is the basis of all this? That science cannot answer. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. So these are the two most significant mysteries of our existence. Number one, what is the universe made of? And number two, what's the basis of consciousness? We don't know. And they are related, aren't they? Because if we weren't conscious beings, we wouldn't know we exist, and we wouldn't know that the universe exists. So maybe they're the same thing, which is what many great non-dual teachers like Adi Shankara, like in all the great spiritual traditions, in what we call the perennial philosophies, that was Aldous Huxley's word. They said that consciousness is without form, but it makes itself known as form. So the universe is made out of nothing, but so is consciousness made out of nothing. You can't see consciousness, you can't touch it, you can't hear it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, and yet without consciousness, we wouldn't be having this experience. So maybe it's consciousness that is interacting with its own self and giving us the experience of body, mind, universe as a unified activity. Okay, so now we have, if we go through the spiritual route, we have a solution to the hard problems of science. That what is the universe made of? Nothing. What is consciousness made of? Nothing. Maybe they're the same thing. Nothing interacts with its own self to create the experience of everything, including our thoughts, our emotions, our experience of our body, and our experience of the universe. Okay, so with that summary, what I want to do is take you through a very short history of how humans have thought about the universe. Okay? So this is the first way humans have thought about the universe. An external divine God manufacturing the universe. And that was there in every tradition of the world in some form or the other. That, of course, above there is a painting of the Sistine Chapel, God creating the universe. But then later we had this universe emerge, the classical universe, which is explained by the laws of motion and universal gravitation, the motion of objects on earth, celestial bodies. Newton explained these laws, which were originally formulated by Kepler. And at that time, there were other luminaries, and they were all part of what we call the European Enlightenment. So Spinoza, Voltaire, René Descartes, Leibniz, and so on. And so the classical universe is created and ruled by fixed laws of nature, known through human reason and logic. Isaac Newton lived from 1643 to 1727. Those laws hold true even now. So when we send people to the moon, or when we land a rover on Mars, we're making use of these classical laws of physics. In other words, they work. Okay, and that led to the industrial age. And then, later, we had the relativistic universe from Einstein, which is much more dynamic, and there are two theories of relativity. Special theory, which basically, if you don't know much about it, it doesn't matter. It says the speed of light is a constant for all frames of reference, and mass and energy are equal. And then there's the general theory of relativity, which came 15 years later, actually 1905 and 1915, 10 years later, which talks about gravity as a curvature in space and time. And again, we know that those theories work, except that around this time, even though the relativistic universe was understood as dynamic, where space-time, matter were all interdependent, this theory, general gravity, did not agree with the theories of quantum physics, so quantum mechanics. So quantum universe was described, amongst others, by Albert Einstein too, although he was uncomfortable with some of its tenets, and there were these other pioneers, Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, Max Planck, and Heisenberg, and Paul Dirac. And when you look at quantum mechanics, there are certain principles there that are very fundamental. One is called the uncertainty principle, where you cannot determine this momentum and the location of a particle at the same time. And there are other principles here, the random movement of atoms, and of course a principle called non-locality, which means there's a dimension of existence where everything is instantly correlated with everything else. You tickle the universe here, it laughs trillions of miles away instantly. Okay, which means particles and their activities are correlated across immense distances in space-time. This theory does not agree with Einstein's general theory of relativity, which describes the universe at big scales, and quantum mechanics describes the universe in small scales. And so if you go to Wikipedia and you look up the interpretations of quantum mechanics, you'll find there are about 20 of those. So what are interpretations? Interpretations are looking at what's the meaning of our calculations. Quantum mechanics works as a calculating mechanism. So if these days you use computers and transistors and email and text messaging, all this is based on the principles of quantum mechanics. We know it works. But what does it mean? What's the underlying ontological explanation for it? People argue about that. So that you see 20 interpretations, which basically means that no one knows what's going on. Okay, so Menas comes from a school that favors the Copenhagen interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation says that before you observe a particle, it only exists as a possibility wave, and once you measure it or observe it, it's a particle. In other words, Copenhagen interpretation says the universe is observer dependent. If you were not looking at it, it wouldn't exist. Okay, but people are uncomfortable about this because that raises all kinds of theological questions and issues. So right now there are 20 explanations and none of them actually explains anything. So all we know is the calculations work. this is where we are today. Okay, and in fact, these have led to many mathematical guessing games. You've heard about these eternal inflation, superstrings, chaotic inflation, M theory. Basically, we can say that we are now in a position where science is kind of stymied in that we don't really have a good explanation for the existence of the universe. As I mentioned, only 0.01% is atomic. And, other people, including Menas in a previous book, have talked about the fact that the universe is conscious, that random events may not be enough to explain the exquisite, what is called the fine-tuning of the laws of nature and the rise of life upon Earth. And so we are in a conundrum right now. And what we are proposing to you today is that actually the universe and consciousness are the same thing. Okay? That when consciousness looks at itself, it experiences itself as the universe. And this is actually a pretty old idea in the Vedanta. That is, the greatest non-dual tradition in the world. Schrödinger was a big fan of this ancient text. The word aham brahmasmi says, I am the universe. Tattvamasi, you are that. All this is that. That alone is. Brahman is the word for universal consciousness, and Brahman is the word for the universe. And so if we really truly understand this, then there is only consciousness, and it experiences itself as knower, the one who knows, the process of knowing, and that which is known, all within its own self. So right now, you who are looking at me is the knower. Okay, the process of knowing is your mind, and that which you're observing, the so-called object that we call Deepak, is also an experience in your own self as a sensation or an image or a feeling or a thought. Okay, so now let's try and deconstruct this, because what I'm saying is that the universe is a human construct. The universe we experience is a human construct. Okay. So if I asked you, what am I holding in my hand? What am I holding in my hand? Microphone. That's a human construct, right? If I asked if a dog wouldn't call this microphone, okay, a bat would not experience this as a microphone. So that's a concept, microphone. So if I was to deconstruct that a little bit and say, what are you observing right now? And you were a little baby and you hadn't been kind of bamboozled by the social conditioning that we're all subject to as soon as we're born, right? As soon as you're born, you said you're a male, you're a boy, you're Indian, you're a Hindu, and you are from this family, and your father is this, and your mother is that, and this is your religion. Now you assume an identity that actually you didn't have anything to do with. As a baby, all you were experiencing was, what were you experiencing? You were experiencing being, and you were experiencing sensations, colors, images, feelings, not even thoughts, because thoughts came later with language. Just a baby knowing it exists or feeling its existence and then experiencing colors and sounds and tastes and textures and life all within itself. And then what did we do? We kind of gave interpretation to the experience. We said, this is you, and you have a body, and you have a mind, and this is a tree, and this is a star, and this is a galaxy. So what we did was we objectified subjective experience, and we called it a reality. Okay, so New York City is a human construct. Nobody doubts that. The microphone as a human construct. But so is your body. Because when you really think about it, your body is a bunch of sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. You give it a label and you say, that's my body. But in fact, you don't really have a thing called a body. If you did, then it would not be changing from moment to moment as an experience. You had the body of a baby. You had the body of a teenager. You have a body now. You will have a body later. Which one is really yours? So what we call a body is a continuum of intermittent sensations, feelings, sense perceptions that we then label as a body. And once we label it as a body, then we have other constructs. You were born and you will die. Based on the construct that there is such a thing as a body. Similarly, mind is a construct around thoughts and emotions, which you're having all the time. But then you say, I have a mind. If you said that, I would ask you, which one? The mind you had yesterday, the mind you had as a teenager, the mind you had as a baby, the mind you have now, the mind you'll have tomorrow. No thought lasts more than a second. Emotions last a little bit, they arise and they subside. Where? In your consciousness. So your mind is also a construct around experience. Your body is a construct around experience. And the entire universe, New York City, but even stars and galaxies, are constructs around experience. And experience is nothing other than sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, sense perceptions, which are all modified forms of consciousness itself. Are you understanding this? Yes. So now, as you're listening to me, just turn to who is doing the listening. As you're listening to me, just be aware of who is listening. You feel a presence, don't you? That's consciousness. Okay? That's the knowing element in every experience. Your body, what you call your body, it was a baby once, but the presence was there. The awareness was there. When you were a teenager, different body, different mind, this presence was there. Right now, this presence is there. So once again, turn back and just be aware of the listener. This is you, experiencing itself as what we call body, mind, and universe. So if you really understand this, and you feel this in the depths of your being, then that is called being awake. Right? Because otherwise we are asleep. In every moment of our existence, we identify ourselves with that which is an experience. And no experience lasts more than a second. Every experience is over as soon as it arises. A thought arises, it subsides, it's over. The thoughts you had an hour ago, you're not having them now. Okay? The perceptions you had even 30 minutes ago or 5 seconds ago are not exactly the same perceptions you're having right now. So every experience is born and every experience dies as soon as it is born. What's the past? It's over. It doesn't exist. What's the future? It doesn't exist. It's an imagination. And what's now is over as soon as it happens. So we call this reality, but we're dreaming. You know, the German philosopher Wittgenstein, he said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming. And what do we wake up to? We wake up to our being, the consciousness, the awareness in which the dream is happening. But because we believe in the dream so much, then we live in fear. This is the basis of what the great mystical traditions say, human suffering. Human suffering occurs, they say, because of the 5 kleshas, which is a Sanskrit word. The first is not knowing who you really are. You're confusing yourself with an experience, not the presence, not the consciousness, not the awareness in which the experience happens. Number 2, you're trying to hold on to something which can't be held on to because it's a movement. It's like taking a photo. So right now, as you're looking at me, actually what you're observing, this moment of perception, is a photo. We have confused ourselves with our selfie. Literally. So if I went to the ocean and I took a photo of the ocean and I brought it to you and I said, look at this wave, look at this beautiful bird, and look at that, surfer, and you said, let's go look at it, would it be the same as the photo I took? Right? This is true of every moment of perception. You're taking a photo of experience and you're saying this is reality. But if I took these photos one after another and I kind of move these still frames very fast, then it would be like the movie that we call reality. Okay? But your selfie is not yourself. We have sacrificed ourself for our selfie. So, and we hold on to the experience, not realizing that the experience is over as soon as it's born. So that's the second cause of human suffering, craving and attachment to a movement which cannot be held on to. It's like holding on to your breath. You will suffocate. The third cause of human suffering is what is called aversion or recoiling from impermanence, which is a fact of life. The Buddha said, our lifetime is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. So stand back and realize that you are a witnessing awareness in which all this is happening. Third cause of human suffering. The fourth cause of human suffering is identifying with another construct called the ego. It's a socially induced hallucination. There's no ego self inside your body. I can go look for that little fellow, but it's not there. It's a hallucination. And the fifth cause of suffering is the fear of death. And so, again, the great wisdom traditions say all these 5 causes of suffering are contained in the first cause. And that is, you don't know who you really are. If you did, that would be your ticket to freedom. Okay, you would realize that birth, death, all these things are constructs. Okay, so now I'm going to give you 4 ideas from the great traditions of yoga. My yoga teacher, Sarah Finger, is sitting right there. And I'm glad that she's here. And I'm making sure I stand correctly in mountain pose. So from the great traditions of yoga, they say, yoga is getting in touch with the source. And the source of mind, body, universe is the same source. The self of the individual is the self of the universe. And so your body, mind is an experience, the universe is an experience. So I'm going to give you 4 ideas that come from the great traditions. And then the rest you can read the book. And you'll have a great adventure if you read the book. But if you actually totally understand these 4 ideas I'll give you, you'll be home free, whether you read the book or not. The book is an interesting read, though, so do read it. The first idea is that everything you experience is a projection of your consciousness. In every moment, whether you like it or not, whether it's Donald Trump or the government or whatever, it's a projection of our consciousness right now. And you cannot change that unless you change within. So principle number one, whatever we experience is a projection of our consciousness. Principle number two, the nature of reality, fundamental nature of reality is that it has no ego. Nothing has an ego. A bird doesn't have an ego, a tree doesn't have an ego, your dog doesn't have an ego, your cat doesn't have an ego, this microphone doesn't have an ego. You don't have an ego. You just made it up. So get it out of the way. Because it hurts you all the time. You feel offended. You have the need to defend your point of view. You want to be right all the time. So it doesn't exist. Number three. This is a little difficult to understand. You were never born. And therefore, there is no death. What was born was an experience. Okay, but the real you is not an experience. You're the presence in which experience is happening. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, when Lord Krishna is describing reality and he's telling Krishna, is telling Arjuna who he really is, he says the real you is not subject to birth and death. Fire cannot burn it, wind cannot dry it, weapons cannot shatter it. It's ancient, water cannot wet it, it's ancient, it's unborn, it is not subject to death. It's the formless being that you are that is experiencing yourself as form and phenomena. Every form is a phenomenon, and every phenomenon is arising and subsiding from the formless as sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. If you can totally understand that and feel that, you will have conquered death. And finally, the fourth principle, if you can see it, if you can touch it, if you can taste it, if you can smell it, if you can think about it, if you can imagine it, if you can conceptualize it, it's not real. What is real is the formless being or consciousness without which there is no taste, smell, texture, thought, emotions. That is who you are, Tattvamasi. That is all there is. So this is a lifetime's quest, but anytime you start the journey, you'll get a taste of freedom. Anytime you start the journey, you'll get a taste of freedom. So I don't want to go any more. I think we've discussed the nature of reality, and the nature of reality is consciousness. And we are the universe. I don't mean it metaphorically, literally. Without you, there would be no such thing as the human universe. Now, of course, there are crocodile universes and dolphin universes and bat universes and insect universes. There are so many species of consciousness. They all have their universes. But there's also some transpersonal consciousness that links us all together in the web of our existence. So you can have a relationship with your dog without knowing what the dog actually is experiencing as reality. Because what we call reality as a perception, there's no such thing. There are as many realities as there are modes of perception. Innumerable modes of perception, innumerable modes of knowing, innumerable knowers, all coming from one source, consciousness. And when we feel that, we also feel love, we feel compassion, we feel empathy, we feel joy, and we feel equanimity, peace. And that's the only way for us to evolve, even in these turbulent times. Okay, so thank you. And we'll put this on the internet so you can visit again and visit our website, which is discoveringyourcosmicself.com, where there are many moderators, amongst them Lindsay and some others from Sweden and my office, my executive team. And we try and answer your questions, and we engage in conversations. But the only way to ultimately create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthy, joyful, and happier world is for us to together take this journey in consciousness. Thank you.